Maria Fyodorovna Semyonova with her big dumb face.
The longest Sophia sequence.
That is midlife crisis.
When are all chairs bolted to the...
We're not told that.
Yeah, we do.
We're not told that.
It is written. It is written.
Hello, McCurdy.
Hello, Chucky Rants.
What are you drinking?
Some Austrian wine that I found.
Appropriate. Corona.
I thought it was
I
appropriate.
didn't put any thought into it.
I was like, yeah, I found this. I was like, I want to drink some wine for this movie. So I was like, let me see what this is. Hillier. I don't know. It was something that was in our cabinet. We probably got gifted this at one point in time, and it was looked like the Austrian flag on it.
Okay, if I disappear in 5 minutes, it's because I'm going to go fill up a glass, because after watching this movie and a bunch of guys sitting around campaigning,
need a lot of wine.
All sipping red wine.
You need a lot of wine for this.
Yeah.
I wish I had red wine, honestly. That's
not red? What is that?
That's what it's a white wine, unfortunately.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll fix that for it. But
yes.
Anyway, we have a special guest tonight, so I'm gonna get my thing out of the way so we can get to it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Also, wait, before we get...
Oh, yeah. I got a full screen, but go ahead. You saved me from myself.
I was going to congratulate Cordy for being our 15th month member. So congratulations, Cordy.
And Cordy's been around forever. Cordy's like OG as hail.
Right.
Yeah. So thanks, Cordy. You're the best. All right.
Toast to Cordy.
Okay, to Cordy.
To Cordy.
To Cordy.
Mm.
Or do we pour one out?
That goes away.
Do we pour it out? No, he's still alive. All right, go away.
He's still alive. I think so.
All right. I guess I'll leave. Hang on. Everything's all screwy. Let me get rid of... We don't need to see my name. Okay.
There we go.
All right, McCurdy. So, Napoleon focuses almost exclusively on Mr. Bonaparte's relationship with his hussy wife, Josephine, and not so much on painting the portrait of a small-statured military genius turned emperor that conquered most of Europe. You know, a topic of absolute fascination. This makes it a frustrating movie because it's not like it needed to be all guts and glory, but it did have to be did it have to be mostly simping and cuckery? Perhaps this would have worked if there was any spark between these two characters, but the movie makes it difficult to care about two people that mostly stare at each other blankly and then go cheat on one another, especially when the filmmakers fail to properly connect those story threads to his military motivations. So even if that was the point, it still falls flat. And I mostly blame Joaquin Phoenix, who is horribly miscast. At this point in his career, he's too much of a wild card to have the discipline for a role like this. That which made him perfect for movies like Joker or The Master makes him a liability in this historical drama. Hence, people laughing at inappropriate times in my theater. Frankly, the movie is a damn mess. It tries to be funny when it should be serious. It's too stale when it should be romantic. And all of the interesting historical plot points are glanced over in favor of flatline Josephine. Prepare to be underwhelmed and let down. Do you agree, McCurds? Tell me your feelings.
You're just jealous because you don't have any boats. That's all I gotta say.
Which, ironically, or is it
my
unironically?
favorite line
the best line of the movie, but it shouldn't be.
You're right.
It shouldn't be.
I
don't know.
Yeah.
But as we're going to reveal in a second, we have an expert who can tell us if Napoleon actually said that or not. I don't know if he can actually confirm it, but it's like,
anyway,
things like that. I'm just like this is it's like if you had Jonah Hill play Napoleon and he's making a joke of it the whole time. You're like, aren't we supposed to be taking this seriously? Who directed this? Why? No, it's postmodern. We're doing like a modern thing on an old thing. No, just have some respect for the source material and let's not joke around too much. But I don't know. This movie's dedicated to Ridley Scott's dog, so I just get the sense that maybe nobody cared about it. Anyway, do your thing. Go ahead, buddy.
Yeah, for me, I pretty much agree for what you had said in the review. I was like, it's kind of how I felt. Very generally just underwhelmed. Just
the movie should have been called Josephine. Unfortunately,
you could have. I was looking forward to something that this movie wasn't exactly. There was times I felt like it was, and then there are times there wasn't. So yeah, let's go. Yeah, let me go ahead and get into it. Let's talk about Napoleon here. All right, so we have don't forget, buy our merch. Christmas is coming up. We got a couple weeks away. You can get
You got to put the Christmas ornament on there.
You got. Oh, that's what I should have done.
There's a Martin Campbell, Lord and Savior.
Martin Campbell. Yes, we have Christmas ornaments now. You can get them at our merch store.
I'm not
Check out
afraid
the
to
links
admit
below.
that I bought it. McCurdy.
There, hold on. Let me hold on. Let me wait, show that up again. Hold on.
Are you taking a shot of it?
Yeah,
All right. I mean, it's gonna be a terrible shot. You removed yourself entirely from the broadcast. Nobody can hear you. Hang on.
What? Okay,
Yeah.
there we go. It doesn't matter.
It's gonna look terrible if you screenshot that. But anyway.
Anyway.
All right, let's move on.
Let's keep moving on. So we have Napoleon, directed by Ridley Scott, written by David Scarpa. I think that's how you say his name. And let's talk
and that's
about
the lie. Real quick though, just go back. That's the lie. He came from nothing. He conquered everything. That's not what this movie is. That's not the story that we're told. And let's see. Let's bring in our expert who can tell us, did Napoleon actually come from nothing, or is that just a BS line to get butts and seats? So anyway.
So bringing us in here, we have Dr.
David.
Dr. Dave.
Who's Dr. Dave? Nobody knows, but he happens to be married to my sister, so we're going to chat with him for a while.
I'm a mystery.
So just to clarify, we're bringing in a blind expert, a history teacher who has not seen the movie. So we're going to see how this works if we talk to him about a movie we've seen but know nothing about Napoleon other than basics. And he hasn't seen Napoleon but knows a thing or two about the real life man. So
I know.
Well, that's cool. You are that old, right?
I knew the guy.
Still father children somehow. But
so Dave, real quick. So when does I mean, this movie has a lot of dates that they throw at you throughout the movie. What is the time period of Napoleon? Can you kind of set us up for like how he came into power and like kind of pre-Napoleon to post-Napoleon, like where in the timeline where that is?
Yeah. Okay. So just based on what you guys were just talking about with the poster, that's probably the first lie the movie told was in the poster. He didn't come from nothing. He wasn't some peasant that rose to power. He was from Corsican nobility. So not to say he was born with any sense of power, but he came from enough means that the path was a little bit easier than it was for most.
But did he conquer everything?
No.
It's also a lie.
he conquered most of Europe, which is impressive in its own right.
Sure.
But to say everything, no.
What I want to know more than anything, was he a soy boy beta cuck?
No. Again, he was often, if that's how the movie depicted him, as like this sad, lonely man just looking for someone to love him, that wasn't the case. Not to say he was by any means your typical strongman general person. His personal endeavors were paled in comparison to what he was trying to do, not just militaristically, because his motivations were coming out of, so going back to that time frame reference, we're talking late 1700s into the early 1800s. Coming on the heels of the French Revolution, he was swept up in that fever. So he was very idealistic as a young man and believed that he could represent those ideals best, which comedically, we look back now and we're like, this man who then becomes an empire-hungry conqueror started off with this revolutionary idea of, hey, we saw the monarchs, we've done the monarchs, and that's not what's best for my countrymen, and we need, power to the people. And,
And then
absolute power corrupts absolutely.
It's the it's the, I think at some point, well, somebody they call Robespierre. They say at one point the whatever the Republic, the Senate, wherever we are, we're in like a Congress, and they're yelling at Robespierre, "You're worse than Caesar." I don't know if they ever, I can't remember if maybe they mentioned later that Napoleon kind of becomes Caesar, where it's like everybody loves him, but he is technically a tyrant. He is a despot. But the movie sets up in the very beginning, the very first, there's like the like titles that are kind of setting up time and place. And it's the first line is something like it's referring to the French Revolution, and it's basically saying from misery, people because of this revolution, people went from misery to tyranny back to misery. And that right away should be the main theme. The central theme is exactly what you just laid out. Here's a guy who's like, these monarchs are bad. Rise up, take out the monarchs. And then he ends up becoming the very thing that he originally sought out to destroy. A tale as old as time. That should be the central theme of seeing. It's no different than on this program we've talked about Citizen Kane. Same thing, where it's like a young idealistic man comes up from nothing. Well, yeah, we'll just follow that thread. Comes from nothing, and then becomes the very system that he sought to destroy. But then the movie just goes like, oh, apparently this movie's all about his wife. And like, forget all that stuff about that very interesting theme that actually was his life, and let's just focus on his wife the whole time. So that was, but anyway.
Sounds like they're trying to depict him as Darth Vader.
I mean, it kind of follows that, but I think the movie just kind of goes from, it goes very quickly through a lot of the events, I guess, that happened in his life. Like they talk about the revolution, then they talk about how he got power to get rid of the royalist, all the people that love the queen and stuff. And then it goes from that to they overthrow the government that preceded the queen, and then he becomes the first consul, and then it goes from that to talking about how he overthrows that, and then he decides he's going to become the head of everything, and then he becomes the emperor,
and all that happens in like 5 minutes, and then it's like back to hang out with his wife for like 30 minutes.
Scene to scene, it's a couple of scenes in, but like it's just like it kind of breezes through a lot of stuff, and I felt like I feel like we were supposed to sit on all these moments in time a little bit longer, but I guess not. Is that pretty accurate though? Is how he rose to power?
Yeah. So you can't point to, hey, this, is the thing where he, it's not a Caesar-esque, I'm going to march on Rome with my people and I'm in charge now. He does rise through the ranks. It's surprising to hear that they try to cover every step, because you're really getting into the bureaucracy of 1700s, 1800s France. It's probably a little unnecessary for a movie. I mean, if you want to catalog his rise to power in 3 easy steps, you just look at the big battles. You look at Toulon, you look at Austerlitz, and you look at Waterloo, and that tells you kind of everything you need to know, right? Toulon is where he makes a name for himself, and people recognize, he knows what to do on the battlefield.
Is that the siege?
Yeah. So
so I think all 3 of those. I think those were the 3. Yeah. So
they have 6. I think there's 6 major sequences in the film as far as battles, and that's one of the first ones. That's the very first one.
He comes up in the world, and people recognize he knows what he's doing, and they start to give him a little bit more power. Austerlitz is where he shows his real military prowess. The thing about Napoleon that most people don't understand, yes, as a tactician, very, very good, but that's not what made him the most impressive of generals and the most impressive military leader. You have to understand that at this period in time, and the further we get into military technology, the more removed we are from the actual cost of battle, right? Like now we push a button and bombs go off somewhere. Back then it was swords and guns. Your ability as a commander to convince people to run into a massive army with just a gun or a sword and give your life for a cause. It took a real compelling person to do that. And that is where Napoleon's real like dynamo comes in. It's not the tactics that he used. He didn't, reinvent the wheel when it came to tactics. He improved upon some existing ones, and strategy wise, he was very good. But he was a compelling leader. He would go and sit with his soldiers in the camps and have conversations, not about what was happening on the eve of battle, but where they were from. He would get to know them on a personal level. He would make them.
That's what I wanted.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. That's what I wanted. But instead, we're at home whining why our wife isn't having sexual intercourse with us enough. Like, that's the type of thing where have that Josephine stuff be brief. And I'm sorry, I know you haven't seen the movie, but have that stuff, like touch on that stuff and maybe use that to motivate. If your whole thesis is that Napoleon is overcompensating for his wife not having sex with him by going to conquer things so that she'll give him attention, then give us a taste of that. And then let's go out into the field. And just like you just laid out, him amongst the men, talking with the men, the military stuff. Instead, it would be just home life, and then just cut to a battle event. And then we would see it, and it's big and it's exciting, but I'm sitting there going, I don't really care because I don't know the significance of what's going on right now. Right.
Yeah,
so
his
even
main motivations were never trying to curry favor with Josephine. His family hated Josephine, and they wanted her gone. And there's numerous depictions of that in letters and things like that back up that story. But yeah, it's a shame that they don't talk about him as a leader of men, which is a way more compelling story.
I will say that there is at least two scenes that come to mind that kind of sort of demonstrate that. But I also felt those scenes were very hollow because one late on in the film when he comes back and then he's like
right after Elba.
Waterloo, right after Elba, he comes back and he's like he's blocked by a bunch of Frenchmen, soldiers, and he gives this speech that like rallies them, and they're like, "Yeah, we're gonna fight for you now." And at first you're kind of like, okay, and it's not. I don't know. It's just not set up well enough where you're really into it. The other scene, and it kind of is more along the lines of what you're talking about, of him becoming more personally aware of his soldiers, was he's like passing bread out to the soldiers, and I was like, okay, that's like a nice little touching thing that you can kind of say, yeah, this is who he was towards his fellow men. But like, I think those are really the only two scenes we really see that. The rest of the movie is, again, just a lot of him whining and whimpering, and then battle scene, and then a little bit more of that, and then it's a lot.
Yeah, no, the whole time I'm going like, is this? I wanted you to be next to me, Dave, to be like, yeah, he actually was a pussy like this. Like because I'm sitting there going, what is happening? Is it because he actually sounded very whiny. They would be he'd be reading letters that he wrote to his wife, and it was just he's very whiny. But then and again, I'm sitting there thinking I'd have McCurdy. If McCurdy was next to me, he'd be going, yeah, that's the point. And I'm like, this seems like maybe I don't know enough about Napoleon, but the uninteresting stuff is the Josephine stuff. Yet that's over half the movie. So to back up real quick, there were the three, McCurdy said 6, but I only recall 3 major battles. There's the first one you talked about, the siege, where they took over. Was that the British? There's so many.
There's a lot of soldiers and back and forth between the Austrians, the Russians,
and the Russians and the Prussians and the Austrians, and So was that against it was the British, right? Were laying siege to the French?
No, that was it was recapturing the French Republic. So that Toulon was in 93. So this is let's see. This is pretty much towards the end of or in the midst of the revolution, where the Republic forces are kind of not necessarily led by Napoleon at this point when we're in Toulon, but he is sort of like the artillery and cavalry guy.
Yeah, he was. I think I think right away that first title card said something like, I think they said he was a gunnery sergeant.
Yeah,
And it said it like a very there's a revolution going on, and a very ambitious gunnery sergeant, looks to prove himself or whatever.
yeah,
And then his plan is we're gonna take over the gunnery battalion on the cliffs there. Essentially,
yeah.
we're gonna destroy all these ships.
So that's accurate. He
Okay.
his plan for that battle was the strategic high points to have basically the best angles to lay
Yeah.
siege, and he did.
Yeah, and then right after that, he meets Josephine, and then ages later, after I'm wondering what I'm doing with my life, there was a battle in the snow against, I believe, was it the Austrians at that point, and it was I would assume the second of the three you're talking about. So you got the first one, and you have Waterloo, and then what's the middle one?
Austerlitz. If you're
That
saying
sounds right.
No, that would have been in December in 1805. Austerlitz is in the Czech Republic today, but it was the Austrian Empire at that point.
Okay, and it's a brilliant scene.
That's probably like the best battle in the entire movie.
For sure. But at the same time, it's like we talk about this a million times or at least I do. I drive McCurdy nuts with this idea of you can show me the most spectacular stuff, and I don't care if it's unclear the importance. And so, yeah, you had scenes of sitting around with other world leaders, and they're talking about we're going to ally with you and we're going to turn against them and all that stuff. And then, but there's if they would have ignored, I know I keep going back to it, but the goddamn Josephine stuff, to really focus in on why we're battling here and there and everywhere. That's the frustrating stuff for me, was that stories in general are about what you emphasize and what you don't emphasize, because you don't have all the time in the world. So it sounds like what you're saying, if there were three major Napoleonic, like, you got to hit these three, they hit those three, but everything else was so just glance over everything else. And even down to, like, McCurdy, did you notice that the title cards seemed extremely fast, or am I just crazy?
What do you mean? Like them showing off, like, oh, this is this period of time, this is what happens.
A basic title card, like, now Napoleon's in this country, and here's the date,
quick.
And then it was gone before I'm like, wait, what? There's a
lot of times I felt like this movie is just on fast forward a lot, where there's a lot of stuff. Like, I don't understand the politics between all of these different factions, and why. Because at one point he's like, oh, we're friends with Russia. And then the next moment, we're not friends with Russia. And I was like, okay, what's going on? Like, I don't know why. Like, it would have been clear. It would have been nice if that was more clear as to why they were conquering these different areas and all this stuff. But like, they're never really clear about that. It's almost like it's more about him getting because they make it so much more about his relationship with Josephine.
Well, let me ask
we're just getting dropped into the events of, like, this is what happened. They were at war at this point, and then this happens.
So, Dr. Dave, what motivated Napoleon?
Initially, the fever of the French Revolution, the rejection of not only the status quo, but the hundreds of years of the monarchy. But then the latter years was simply personal pride, glory, conquest. He hated England. So one of his main goals was to overthrow England. A lot of people say he wanted to, conquer the world, but he had to get through Europe to get to England. So I think that was his main thing, is I'm gonna conquer as much as I can. He wanted to build out a buffer zone. So, like, I'm gonna keep pushing out. If you think about it, historical parallel, it's sort of what the Mongols were doing when they conquered China. We're gonna push out, draw all the resources back in, and solidify China, so that when the outskirts fall, we have a much more powerful China to contend with. same thing. He's going to build out, bring all the resources back to, proper
attacking a tiny little island, like take all of Europe, and then go. So was that just because they were the world superpower at that point?
They hated each other. I mean,
I mean, that goes on. Yeah, like that's France and England always hating each other, but specifically his hatred, just because. Okay, the movie ends with just a simple title card that it says what his final words were. And apparently his final word, do you know what his final words were?
Not off the top of my head.
It was France, Army, Josephine. And so what kind of bugged me was, like I said, at the outset, it laid out that theme of like, here's what was going on with the French people from misery to tyranny. Like from misery, they turned to tyranny, which brought them back to misery. And then by the end, his final words are not Josephine, Army, France, or Josephine wasn't first, she was last. But by the end, it's like they pull the rug out from under you. Like, we're going to emphasize Josephine, but he said France first. So yeah, he loved France.
That makes perfect
sense.
The
military.
That's why I'm surprised that they spent so much time on the Josephine thing, because that wasn't his primary motivator. His love of his country was his primary motivator. And then, it's funny that Army comes next, and that's part of the reason why he hated France. And I know when you started
hated England.
Boats.
Hated England.
I'm sorry. The quote about the boats. He didn't say those exact words, but he did allude to the fact that the British felt as though they were superior to everyone because of their navy.
Sure.
And I mean, if you want,
that's how they took over the world.
Yeah, and if you want to get into even 1588, the defeat of the Spanish Armada. Spain had the greatest navy in the world. They tried to overthrow England in 1588, but there was a freak North Atlantic hurricane that kind of wiped out their fleet, and that left the only navy of power in Europe at that point was England, which is how they were able to then garner so much power by the time the events of Napoleon take place. And he disliked the fact because he didn't feel there was strategy to using boats the way there's strategy on the battlefield. So he kind of looked at England as like, well, you guys are so powerful, but you don't have the strategy and the tactics. You're not as intelligent as I am or as we are. So he didn't respect that kind of, naval power as being a real intelligent military power. It was just like, hey, we build a lot of ships. So you have that, right? Like I fight with an army, you fight with a navy. We don't like each other. So it makes sense that Army would be ahead of Josephine. Josephine is just, she's there.
And his whole life was military, so it makes total sense. And then, Josephine, how sweet. But that's where the movie's where it is kind of all over the place. And where there are certain things, I know it's a common thing to say today, but there are certain topics that are so big that they should be a miniseries, as opposed to one movie trying to do everything at once. Because it'd be nice if this movie had a single theme and stuck to it. And Oppenheimer, did you end up seeing Oppenheimer?
Not yet. Okay.
Well, Oppenheimer, what it does correctly is you really get a sense of who the man is. I didn't know much about him going into it, but coming out of it, I'm like, I feel like I know the guy through and through. Headstrong, kind of full of himself, oddly, somewhat of a communist sympathizer, but then also haunted by this thing that he made. And so you have this whole Promethean theme, and that Promethean theme is what anchors the whole plot. With this, I didn't feel like I knew the man, other than like, I guess he's kind of whiny about his wife, and she didn't really care for him, but she did at the same time. And it's like, that's where it's kind of a letdown, where it just doesn't have that streamlined, because it doesn't have that logical streamlined plot, it lacks the emotional payoff. And that's the disappointment. That's the letdown of it. Versus if there was an episode that set her up, their relationship up, and then we've revisited her here and there. But meanwhile, we're not glancing over all this more interesting historical stuff, but we're were fully fleshing it out, that's where it's like, this shouldn't have been a movie, you know? And again, I know that's a common thing to say today, but certain things should be that way. Other things that are a miniseries could have just been a movie, like the Wu-Tang show. The Wu-Tang show could have just been a movie or two, right? So it's not always like a fallback criticism, but with something like this, it really should have been. So we should do a follow-up episode after you see it, and we'll just bring you back in, and you'll be like, it actually was perfect. It's the best Napoleon movie ever. Other than Napoleon Dynamite.
Yeah, I mean that's
timeless.
If you wanted to, I have to imagine that they're trying to play up the Josephine thing to like tug at the heartstrings.
Yeah.
But I think the majority of people going to see this film are not really interested in Napoleon's love life and his family dynamics. And if you want to tug at the heartstrings of those viewers, I mean, there's no better story than this man fighting to overthrow this power, this centuries-old power, for the sake of his fellow countrymen, and leading them and having those conversations and trying to play up the fact that if I'm Napoleon, I'm conversing with these people and I'm trying to get to know them on a personal level, and I'm trying to motivate them to fight for this idealistic version of what France could be.
And then go send them to die.
Sending them to die.
Yeah.
Like, I'm fighting for them who are about to die. I'm sorry, that gets me. Like, now I'm invested, and I'm like, I'm feeling that. I've never served. Great respect for everyone who has served, but I can imagine that is a story that's going to touch people, because hey, I'm trying to get you to believe this thing and to die for this thing.
Yeah.
Not an easy task, and that's, once again, going back to his greatness, is he was able to convince men to do that. Not only do that, but after he's removed from power and comes back, you want to tell that story. Why do you think they followed him again? He's that enigmatic of a leader that they were like, you've already been removed from power and basically exiled, but we're still going to support you.
Well, McCurdy touched on the scene, and it was probably the best scene of the movie, in my opinion, was that it was right after Elba. I know he kind of touched on it already, but basically they're about to fire upon him. And he to this firing squad of 200 men, he basically is like, hey, guys, it's me, your emperor. Remember me? Will you still fight for me? And they're like, yeah, like they all rally around him, and then they rejoin him. That's the type of stuff where you're like, that's what I wanted. And you don't get that scene.
You don't get that emotional payoff unless you dive deep into the story of him working so hard to get to know his men.
That was not set up.
I'm not a director. I'm not but I can imagine, if you want to like tell some historical inaccuracies, take one of those men he had a conversation with early in the movie and put them on that firing squad. And then you have that kind of, then they go, oh, that's why they were willing to not fire on him.
And and then along those lines, how long did he spend on Elba? Where, for anybody who doesn't know, he was banished after he was banished specifically because the Russian campaign was so catastrophic that they basically said, you're not emperor anymore. You're gonna live a cushy life on Elba. And the movie made it seem like he was there for a week.
Less than a year. About 9 or 10 months.
Okay.
Still long enough where, he was able to write a lot. We have a lot of correspondence of his from that period in time to let you know what he was thinking. And that's where you start to see a little bit of the turn of like, I tried to do it for France, now I'm going to do it for me kind of situation. But yeah, I mean, it sounds like, from what you guys are saying, that they just chose to focus on the wrong things. I don't know what Ridley Scott has going on in his personal life. Maybe he's drawn a parallel to that. Maybe he lost the flame. I don't know. But
again, he dedicated the movie to his dog. So like, I thought when I saw Lulu, I honestly thought, I was like, wait, was that his? I had to look it up. I thought because I know his wife, famously, he puts her in pretty much all his movies. Probably the most recognizable would be the actual wife of Gladiator in the movie Gladiator is his wife, is Ridley Scott's wife. And so he puts her in everything. Everybody knows that. And so I thought, oh God, did his wife pass? Was her nickname Lulu? No, it was his dog. And like, I love dogs. I love my dogs.
Yeah.
But now for the rest of eternity, this movie about this great man, Napoleon Bonaparte, then is just like, oh, by the way, I love my dog. You're like, dude, what? No, like, you're just going up to the statue of Napoleon and just carving Lulu on it. You know, like, no, dude, time and place. And then that's the thing. That's kind of what I'm getting at, is that when it comes to Joaquin Phoenix himself, just kind of like being crazy weirdo Joaquin Phoenix, it's like, no, dude, let's try to be Napoleon. And I didn't know Napoleon personally, but I get the feeling that he never said, you British just think you're so cool because you have boats. Like, I don't think that was a thing. So I don't.
And he definitely wouldn't have said it in English.
And it's, you know, I don't. Nobody wants Joaquin Phoenix to try to do an outrageous French accent, you know, to quote Monty Python. But but cast somebody else and have them do a French accent, maybe. I don't know. I don't know.
There's other little things that I've heard are in the film, like the Battle of the Pyramids. I guess they showed him firing on the pyramids and the Sphinx. And
what is it? Is that real?
No.
Then why do it? Because Ridley was bent out of shape about his dog. I just can't.
There's an old myth that Napoleon fired cannons at the Sphinx, and that's why the Sphinx's nose was busted. So I guess they just wanted to play on that. But no, that did not. He was down there. It would have been more impressive. You know, he conquered the Mamluks in Egypt, which they've been around since the 1200s. That's another more impressive story to tell. If you want to talk about his time in Egypt.
Will McCurdy, Dr. Dave, has been tragically murdered.
Glitched.
Frozen to death.
Oh.
He invaded Russia and he froze to death.
Yeah. There was no giant lake at Austerlitz.
Really?
Yeah, no.
That was the best part.
God, no.
That was the best part.
I want to unlearn what you just told me. That was the best part.
There were people that drowned, but it was essentially like a series of small ponds. It wasn't this massive like Great Lake type scenario.
And there wasn't, and that's the type of stuff where I've said to McCurdy time and again, when it comes to historical accuracy, inaccuracy, I don't care if it makes the story better. Go ahead and lie to me, go ahead and embellish if it makes the story better. So I'm fine with that. I'm fine with, all these men run out onto the lake. And that's the type of thing where another one of my biggest beefs was like, okay, wait, isn't this guy supposed to be the greatest military tactician? Well, that exemplified it. But getting up to that, there wasn't, other than that very first, dismantling the siege of Tucson, Arizona. What? Toulon?
Tucson, Arizona?
When he went over to that was in the movie. Yeah. He went over to America and he conquered the indigenous.
Time traveled.
Yeah. What didn't they do in this movie? That was
well, he time traveled in Bill and Ted, didn't he?
Okay.
That was a meme. That's been a meme this whole week with this movie.
Really?
Yeah. They're like they never included the battle of whatever it was in Bill and Ted. So,
I just only ever remember Beef Oven. That's probably my favorite joke of that whole movie. Dude, that's Beef Oven. You mean Beethoven? Anyway, so yeah, they showcasing him as a brilliant tactician / an inspiration to his men were the two things missing. Other than there's a scene where, like we just said, where the Austrians, right? We said they attack first, then he sends his men in on the flank, and then that pushes all the Austrians out onto the ice, and then they fire onto the ice. So it's like, okay, he is a brilliant tactician, but you don't really get that sense until that, which is, I think, past the halfway point of the movie. So it's like the guy becomes emperor before you're like, he's already emperor. How did we get here? There was a coup, but then he was part of like a triumvirate type of thing, a third consul. And then suddenly he's emperor. So that's what I mean. When and somebody might come along and say, well, this detail was in the movie. And I go, yeah, but without further emphasis, there isn't even enough time to read the damn cards, the informational cards about the date and place, let alone, okay, what's happening? And then right after that, he's boofing his wife. It's just, anyway. McCurdy, do you have any other questions for Dr. Dave other than I want to get to SB saying, historically film speaking, is this worse than The Patriot and Braveheart?
Oh man, I refuse to say a bad thing about The Patriot
or Braveheart. Those movies are far better than this.
If Mel Gibson played Napoleon, this would have been a top 5 movie of all time for me, probably.
Agreed. Too bad he's too old, but yeah, that would have been great.
No, I honestly don't have any other questions for Dr. Dave. But Dr. Dave, we appreciate your insight and intellect on this matter, because again, I went into this movie very little knowledge of Napoleon. Came out of this movie like, okay, I guess that's what
unintended
happened.
Or
no, like I honestly think like growing up, I think we focused more on American history than anything else. So there's a lot of world history that just kind of got like, yeah, Napoleon was a thing, and I'm like, cool. But focusing more on American history.
This is Napoleon. This is all we know about Napoleon.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's all we know.
Yeah.
So
I vaguely knew Waterloo, and I vaguely knew that like he was in control.
Well, we know Waterloo from The Living Daylights, right? Where crap, what was the general, the British general?
Oh yeah. I don't
Wellington.
remember that guy.
And at the end of the Bond movie, The Living Daylights, the what's his name, JB, Joe Don Baker, JDB. He's like, yeah, that Wellington, he was a wussy. And then the statue of Wellington is what lands on him and kills him. And then Bond gives the Bond joke, which is he's had his Waterloo. This guy's dead now. But so that's right. What I just said is the extent of my Napoleon.
Shame. He's an enigmatic figure. Very important time in history.
No, he was a soy boy beta cuck, and that's all he'll ever be.
He might have been
ever because of this movie. So nobody. I mean, he told his wife, he's like, yeah, I've been banging other chicks, but he definitely had that like.
But you had
love
sex.
Me? Yeah,
like but you slept with this other dude.
Last thing I'll say is that he left Cairo because he heard his wife was cheating on him. Is that accurate?
No.
So there you go. I'm just like, she's not that interesting.
He left Cairo because there was sufficient administration for it to operate on its own without his firsthand, control over it. He took a page out of, Alexander's book. Alexander conquered the world, but it all fell like that because he didn't bother to set up an administration. He just wanted to fight. Napoleon recognized, hey, I have to take a place over, leave it in good hands. And that comes from his strategy on the battlefield. His main tactic, aside from being able to use cannons well, his main tactic that he improved upon that already existed was breaking your army down into interdependent segments. So I'm going to give autonomous control of this group. So they're going to go fight over here, and autonomous control to this group to go fight over here, and communicate with each other what their needs are so that you cut down the amount of relaying back to me and having to make all these decisions. And that meant that you have much faster, more mobile artillery and troops on the ground being able to make decisions based on what they are seeing in front of them. So not being this power-hungry controller and saying, I'm going to create the big picture and then let them administer it on their own. Yeah. And that's how he ruled the empire and did fantastically well for a very long time.
And that's where I think that, honestly, a movie called Napoleon would have been better served by like the whole he came from nothing. That implies that we meet him when he's a child. Instead, we don't. It's like right before the siege of Tucson, and he is a full-grown man versus, like, we all know the Napoleon complex came from him being a short in stature. I guess I looked it up. He was 5'6". This man is 5'8". So not that off for casting him, but apparently he was bullied, and that led to him because not just because of his height, but because he was Italian living in France and he couldn't speak French very well, and all these things that then led to what we all now call a Napoleon complex, where it's like overcompensating for, let's say, a lack of self-esteem by taking over the world, basically. But that would have served that title better to see his upbringing and then use that to where, okay, he's being bullied. So then he stuck his nose into the books. And then that's where he's like, well, they're doing military all wrong. Instead of it all going back to one guy, then we'll divide it up, and then we'll have these separate, units go out and take this objective, take that objective. So it's just all these things. I don't know. I mean, if he left Cairo, instead of for Josephine, if he left Cairo because his dog was dying or something, because Ridley Scott was just like had Lulu on the mind, I could get behind this movie where it's just like, oh, okay, nobody's taking it seriously. But like the man himself would probably not have liked this movie very much, and he'd be like, why is the guy who played the Joker? Why did he play me? Because he's a weirdo. He's just a professional weirdo. So.
One last thing, you touched on the Napoleon complex, and I think this is where the movie, once again, does it a little bit of disservice. The reason why he had the complex, he was short, but not indelibly short for the period. He was, like you said, of course, again, descent, right? So he is kind of the bottom rung of the aristocracy. So he's coming up under the thumb of the French monarchy, who are looking down on him for being, of course, again, descent. So it's his animosity towards the monarchy is already growing because of his treatment by being kind of considered an outsider to it from not being of, noble French blood. So like that complex isn't from his height. The complex is, I don't like the monarchy. So when the revolution comes, he's like, oh yeah, I'm all about this. Like, screw these people.
Okay,
so,
a better story. Already a better story. And if you want it to be, people say when you tell a historical tale, you need to tell it through a modern lens. And that's obviously something that's always going on, is that the revolution, man. So like, not that difficult to take a story like that and tell it through that modern lens. So it's just all the more frustrating. So McCurdy and I are going to get to initial ranking where we think this movie should go. But, thank you, Mr. Dr. Dave.
It's been a pleasure. Any other questions about history, let me know.
The only thing left is SB said you should play Holdfast. I have no idea what that means. Is that a video game?
I think it's a video game.
Okay.
I was looking that up too. I think it's a video game. So or he was saying he should play Hold Fast in a movie.
I have no idea.
I was like, I don't get the reference.
Yeah. Anyway,
but I think it's a video game.
Yeah.
Well, we'll let you go, Dr. Dave.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you see the movie, maybe we can just on another episode, we can just have you pop in and be like, it sucked, and then leave. Or it was fantastic. So,
all right, y'all. Hey, stay safe.
Later.
Thanks. See ya.
So,
all right, I still have.
Let's pull it up.
So that was Napoleon. So hold on, I'm not done with my slides.
Oh yeah, you still have slides. Yeah, I
just keep
had to bring Dave on for 15 minutes, but like he knows his stuff, so we got a lot of questions. Here, let me bring you back.
Let's finish these slides real quick. So I do have a couple, at least two. I think at least one interesting one. At least this film has very much a Kubrick connection. Now this film has a very strange connection to the late great Stanley Kubrick in a number of ways. After Kubrick completed 2001: A Space Odyssey, he pitched to MGM his next film, Napoleon. To MGM Studios for development, Kubrick spent over 2 years developing the script, researching the costumes of the era, and even went to scouting locations in Yugoslavia, and had the Romanian army ready to secure 50,000 extras for the battle scene. So they were going to use Romanian's army was going to be extras in this movie that he needed to reenact all these battle scenes. And by the early 70s, several other Napoleonic films came and went, and they bombed at the box office. So that all being said, however much of because they bombed, he decided I'm going to pass on this movie. I'm not going to make this movie. And MGM wasn't really thrilled for it. So then he went on to do Clockwork Orange not that long after that. And then, but however much of Kubrick's research was salvaged for other historic epic, which was Barry Lyndon, which takes place only a few decades after the events of the Napoleonic Wars, essentially. So it looks like they're around the same time period, but I mean, back then things took a little bit longer to progress technologically as well as in fashion and everything else. So Barry Lyndon takes place maybe 2 decades after.
If you've seen Barry Lyndon, you cannot help but think of it the entire time you're watching this movie, because it's
right.
just the quintessential Victorian, if that's even the correct term, I don't know, but that Barry Lyndon's all about one of the central themes is dueling. I mean, right there you have the duelist.
Which,
but
hold on, let me get to this next point though, because that film inspired the young Ridley Scott, who was 40 at the time. His first movie. His first movie is at 40 years old. There's still time, Charlie.
There's still hope for both of us.
Still hope. His first film, The Duelist, which does take place during that time period. So The Duelist takes place exactly during the Napoleonic Wars. Okay. And if I'm not mistaken, the main character... Have you ever seen The Duelist? Because I've never seen it.
I actually just bought it because I planned on watching it.
So apparently, if you watch the movie, I was looking at like screenshots. Stars Harvey Keitel. The main character in that film strongly resembles in the hairstyling and the uniform, the character that is sleeping with Josephine in this Napoleon movie. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's not like they're in the same universe.
Some headcanon there.
Kind of just like, hey, this is kind of linked together.
Some Ridley Scotian. Would that be the way you would say it? Not Ridley Scottian, but Ridley Scotian headcanon with the guy banging Josephine.
Sure.
But okay, so you're saying Barry Lyndon inspired The Duelists?
Yeah. So he.
Okay. Again, Barry Lyndon is excellent. Have you seen Barry Lyndon?
Yes, I have seen Barry Lyndon. I think it's one of Kubrick's movies that gets overlooked the most because it's not the big science fiction movie or the really crass Clockwork Orange, or doesn't have like the fantastic scenes like in Full Metal Jacket or something like it's one of the movies I think just in his filmography usually gets overlooked for a lot
because of what it is. Because typically when you have the again, I'll throw in Victorian. I don't know if there's a better term for it, but that stuff ends up just kind of being like fruity, like it's sure. Very like my mom's always on me about like, have you watched Downton Abbey yet? I'm like, yeah, I'm sure it's great, but I just don't like until I start watching it. I have no interest. But exactly, dull and boring. But Barry Lyndon is all about sex and dueling and killing each other and betrayal, and so that's the thing is that it's almost like famously that's what the Victorian era is all about. Sexual discretion, but meanwhile there's still that animal, and it just kind of reflects what we learned in remember in the Holdovers, where the whole thing was the teacher says
professor's talking about like
every generation thinks they invented sex and debauchery, and that couldn't be more true, right? It's like it's like oh, grandma, like, oh, don't talk about sex around grandma. It's like you wouldn't be here if grandma didn't bang grandpa. So right. But now okay, hold on, but can't recommend it more.
Right. So it was inspired. So when Ridley Scott was making, because he was a commercial director, he did commercials and advertisement, and then this was his first movie. Made it under $1 million. It was like 900,000. He made that movie. He was very much inspired by The Duelist. I think Duelist was 72. His movie was 77, so it's not that far removed from it. But he was inspired mostly from his cinematography, and Kubrick was going to use a lot of like. What Kubrick was going to do with his Napoleon was there were going to be a lot of sex scenes with Napoleon, and he was going to film them with him having sex with Josephine, and there was going to be candlelight. But at the time, they didn't have the cameras that would be able to shoot all the stuff wasn't readily available. And so he, like K1's talking about, he ended up getting lenses, specifically the lenses from NASA that would open up extremely wide.
After
and he was going to
the
use
moon
that.
landings.
Yes, after
Says
faking the moon
K1.
landings. Yes, but what's
in
interesting, what's
all
even more
likelihood.
interesting, that kind of ties this way back to Napoleon, though, this film is that Ridley Scott did get his hands on Kubrick's script. Now, like Warner Brothers had come back to Kubrick and say, "Hey, yeah, we'll produce this movie, we'll make it." And by that point, he's like, I have no interest in making this movie. And this was in the 90s. He's like, I don't really care to make this. We don't need to make this movie. But Ridley Scott did get a chance to read his version. His version encapsulated.
There's not enough Josephine in this. Where's
Well,
Josephine?
it wasn't so much that his movie, Kubrick's movie, would have been like from his birth to his death, like much more.
Perfect.
I usually don't
Give me
like
that
those
movie.
types of movies. Typically, I don't like movies that are like, I want something a little more specific and honed in. That's why I think that's one of the reasons why I liked Oppenheimer, because it was more specific and honed in.
We don't
as
need
what
to see
story it was telling.
Oppenheimer coming out of his mother's box, but but to actually see the wouldn't hurt to at least see Oppenheimer. We saw him in school. Wouldn't hurt to see
Napoleon getting
in school,
raising how he
getting
got raised
bullied
and stuff,
or just studying a lot, you know.
Sure.
We didn't really see him become anything. That's what's so frustrating, is stories like this. Like, you wouldn't care about Star Wars if you didn't see Luke Skywalker become a Jedi. If he was already a Jedi, maybe that's one thing.
You wouldn't be,
but it wouldn't be it's not the hero's journey without becoming the hero.
Yes. So anyway, but apparently Ridley Scott said the first thing he said after reading the script was like, he just felt it was underwhelming. He felt like Kubrick's script was underwhelming, which is hilarious because you watch this movie and I feel like this movie's underwhelming. So let's go to my next slide real quick. We'll just talk about Ridley Scott. He's a British director. You could put him with the greats of filmmakers. Maybe. Films like Alien, Blade Runner, Gladiator, Thelma and Louise, The Martian. I'd also say he has just.
SB said he's known to be pompous. He deserves it. He's Ridley effing Scott.
But I will say this. I think he has just as many hits as he does misses. I think even later, more recently, I think most of his films have kind of missed the mark as people. I don't know. Some of his earlier films, I think, really hit the mark. But even some of his earlier films like Legend, and you and I would agree, is it's a pretty looking movie that's really underwhelming. And there's other movies that are in that category where it's like, wow, visually this looks stunning, but as a film, it's not as it just doesn't hit the mark. And like I said earlier, he was 40 years old when he made The Duelist. So again, gives us hope for these older filmmakers out there still trying to make movies. But apparently he has said that there's going to be a 4-hour version of this film on Apple Plus.
Great.
Once it's released.
I will watch it.
I'm curious to see that version, just because one of my complaints with this movie is I think as much as some people complain about movies like Killer of the Flower Moon or Oppenheimer or Beau Is Afraid being too long, sometimes you need that length to kind of fill in, just to stretch things out so you can really get the impact of certain elements. And
like
I do wonder, it's like,
movies,
I want to
stories are about what you emphasize and, more importantly, what you don't. And that's an editor's job. Without editors, you probably every movie would be 8 hours long, because that's pretty much I won't say every, but a lot of movies made are insanely long. And then that's the editor's job to be like, well, let's really focus on what's important. And so with this, again, the emphasis being on Josephine is a big miss. And that might be, I mean, I'm looking at the movies you've thrown here, and
I think this is I think I just looked up his filmography and said, here, can someone, I think someone had already put this graphic together. I just threw it together. It's low quality, but I'm like, I think these are all of his films up until this point. I think they are. And I had to check because I'm like, did he do Black Rain? He did Black Rain. And I actually like
Prometheus. Prometheus is, it is in there. Okay. Everything's so low quality.
Yeah.
I think so. I was working there right when Prometheus hit. And every time I go see a Ridley Scott movie, I look for the production designer. I always look to see if it's Arthur Max, because he's awesome. And like I've told the story before, he would sit with the interns and have lunch with us. Every day he was in the office. He was like, I love sitting with interns. His accent wasn't that Cockney or stupid, but it was always a really cool guy. He was the production designer on this for sure. And
did you meet Ridley Scott?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Like I told the story before where I embarrassed myself horribly because the first time I interacted with him, I turned a corner and I ran like into him. Like I just I just go, I bounced off basically. It was like, "Hi, how are you?" And I just ran off because I was like, "Oh Jesus Christ," you know. But he had just lost Tony, you know. So
yeah.
And so it was. I've told the story before. I don't need to tell it again. But it was it was not time. It was, you know, because Ridley is famously more British than Tony. Tony's like the American brother. You know, he's I mean, he made Top Gun. And then Ridley is more British. And so their offices are in both countries because they started as he was an ad man. I mean, Ridley was making commercials for forever in London. And then before they specifically came to LA to break into films. And so Tony was like kind of the leader of the LA office. And so, you know, I got there right when he passed. Again, I know I've said it before, but the first job they gave me was, hey, the big conference room, go clear everything out of it. I went in there, I slide these big doors open, and it's all flowers. Huge conference room, nothing but flowers that the entire city of Los Angeles had sent. And my task was to throw all of that in the dumpster out back. And I was like, this is weird. I mean, and I've shot a funeral before. And I thought that was awkward. And then, you know, I did this. So,
yeah.
So it was sad. I felt bad for him, but then he was gone. Ridley was just most of the time he was gone because I think he buried himself with work because he was
sad for his brother. Yeah, I understand that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think just looking at his career as a whole, I think when this year we've been fortunate to get movies from Scorsese and Christopher Nolan and of course, you know, you got Steven Spielberg. I'd put his name in that list, but I do think when you look at his filmography, it doesn't necessarily I think it stacks. You want to say it stacks higher just because you have films like Alien and Blade Runner and Gladiator in there. But when you look at the rest of his filmography, there are a lot of misses too. So I don't think he's not the greatest, but I do think he would be considered in the echelon of some of the best filmmakers ever made.
He could come out with a movie next year that could be fantastic. That's the thing is that.
But I think he's been on a roll of not great movies. The last couple of movies he's made have been kind of lackluster. And I think I'm looking at, except for maybe The Martian, I'm looking at Alien Covenant. I thought that was lackluster. I didn't see.
Did you see
The Last Duel?
Did you see The Last Duel?
I didn't see that. I heard that was also kind of wishy-washy.
Was it? Okay.
I've heard things, but I mean, I could be wrong. I didn't see that movie, and I don't know. House of Gucci, yes, maybe, no, I don't know.
Okay.
But just not as big, not as heavy hitting as some of his other movies. Like every once in a while, he gets a big hit, and sometimes he just hits doubles, you know.
But then I heard for a long time that American Gangster was bad, and then I recently watched it, and I was like, "This is a good movie."
You're like, it's pretty good,
you know. Yeah. Okay. So
I
didn't
don't know,
get
maybe
wishy-washy stuff from that. So
right. I think and it's interesting because he's kind of between science fiction and these historical epics. This has kind of been his wheelhouse, and then every once in a while he does something that's sort of outside of that. Yeah. And
like like Gladiator. Obviously, everybody loves Gladiator, and then it's oh wow, he's gonna do Robin Hood with basically the same team, and then you go see Robin Hood, and you're like, ooh, you know.
Yeah.
So
he's great, but he's also like someday he has a bad day at the office, and it's not every day. But you know, he's hit or miss, I think. But he's still I enjoy most of his movies that I generally see. And
just real quick, sorry. I mean, SB and K1 and Todd Howard Sigma have been throwing tons of comments at us. I keep trying to keep up with them, but you guys are giving us a bunch of good ones. But I'm like SB has about 5 dozen. Maybe we'll try to get to.
But he's like, what about this, guys?
Like we're over an hour in. We still haven't gotten past McCurdy's slides.
No. Well, okay. We'll get this. Is their last slide.
Here you go.
So
he made this movie bad on purpose.
Here.
As for revenge. So like as the British brother,
because he's British. He's, like, he's just like F you.
Yeah, I hate the French so much. I'm gonna cast Joaquin Phoenix, professional weirdo, to play him and have him say weird things like, this lamb chop is my destiny.
Hey, well, that's not exactly what he said, but okay. Anyway, so apparently, yes, Joaquin Phoenix plays Napoleon, as we all know. Apparently, it was a combination of a couple things. Apparently, Ridley Scott wanted him for this role because of his Joker performance, and 2, because he thought he looked a little bit like Napoleon.
Which
he also said that there's another actor.
Why would you want him for the Joker?
Right. But apparently, there was another actor that he had in mind. He wouldn't say who it was. My guess is it's Mads Mikkelsen. Like, that's who I would have wanted to cast in this role for Napoleon, is Mads Mikkelsen. Honestly,
don't throw
that's who I would have.
I'm full of regret. That would have been great.
Right. But apparently, Joaquin also had a lot of influence on the script, which may explain some of the really weird scenes that we get. And he had a lot of influence. Apparently, him and Ridley Scott, like, some people have made the correlation between like Killers of the Flower Moon, where Leo and Scorsese kind of reworked a lot of the script after the fact to kind of hone it for Leo. In the same vein, they kind of did that here. I don't think it works here. Like, I even remember the first couple scenes of the movie, and I'm like, I don't buy him as Napoleon at all. Like, maybe it's just because my zeitgeist head of what Napoleon should be in a movie isn't this, but it just does. I don't know if it's his acting. I don't know what it is. It just doesn't.
I think it's the worst call of the movie. Is to
have
Joaquin produce.
Wasn't a huge fan.
But having him play the role, I mean, again, even just like looking at this image, I'm fine with his look, but as we've talked about, whether it's Leo, I put Leo in this. Leo is a lot of times a professional weirdo, not to the same degree, but I do see a lot of similarities between Joaquin and Leo, where specifically for me, as I've laid out a million times, it's not like they're bad actors. By far, they're not. But they have to be cast well. And at this point in his career, Joaquin, again, the master, he could only have played, what's his name? The Joker. Great. Because what you get out of them is that wild card thing. Beau Is Afraid, perfection. You get this wild card thing out of them where they do kind of experiment, but with something as specific as a historical biopic, and again, I'll keep going back to, you guys just think you're so cool because you have boats, was maybe funny at the time. My favorite line. And then Ridley's over in the corner lamenting the loss of his dog, and he's like, he's just like, whatever.
Put it in the movie.
Yeah,
whatever.
Because he doesn't care.
Put it in the movie.
And so again, same with Leo. Like, we talked a lot during Killers, where I think he really did a good job. He did a really good job on Killers, but most of the time, I think Leo is horribly miscast because you need to play to his only strength, which is intense energy. And then Joaquin has basically become famous for being a professional weirdo. And that's different from what I say about who are the other ones? I said Johnny Depp and Benicio del Toro. Yeah. Coincidentally, were in Why Are There Balloons on Me?
What did you do?
Oh my God, dude. If like a creepy clown pops up and kills me.
What did you do?
I have no idea. Oh my God! Why
did we get?
I wish that was like a super chat or something.
Did we get a super chat? Why are there balloons on you?
Maybe I should stop talking trash about Hollywood people. I don't know. Dude. Okay,
he's after you, bro.
Anyway,
He's after
professional
you.
weirdos.
I need you to be alive. I need you to be alive. Okay, I can't do this.
Your movie's not done yet.
It's not done. I just need you to be alive. Anyway,
but
he's professional
you have till
weirdo.
40. You have what? You have 5-6 years. But yeah, real quick, Benicio del Toro and Johnny Depp, professional weirdos. And now I kind of put Joaquin slightly in that. And yes, Joaquin was, I get that he was, it's not his first historical drama. He did Gladiator with Ridley Scott. He was fantastic in that, but that was also 24 years ago, 23 years ago.
Here's the thing.
He's a different actor now.
No. After he did, what was the movie where he said, "I'm not here"? Wasn't that the movie where like it was like
I think it's "I'm Still Here" or whatever.
I'm Still Here, and like he did
so.
that movie, and people thought he said he was retired from acting or something, and
he was going to become a rapper.
Joke for this, and it was all a joke for this one movie.
Yeah.
After that movie, every role he had, I think after that, it was not a serious role. He's these weird roles because if you look at his roles prior to that, I think he's taken more as like a very serious villain. Like he's very typecasted in those earlier roles, I think, and a little more of a serious in serious roles. And then after that, he just starts doing all these strange, kind of bizarre roles. Not bad, but just different. And I do think it's just I agree. Like it's
The Master, he's
choice.
jerking off on the beach, and then soon after that, the Joker, he's going insane. And what that requires is like basically in the Master makes sense if you approach it from the standpoint of the Master is literally the Master, and like Joaquin's character is a dog. The whole, I mean, at some point they're wrestling out in the yard. He runs away at some point, just like a dog would. That's where for a role like that, Joaquin's strength plays into that because he is weird. But then to play Napoleon, it's like, okay, dude, I know you're producing this, but we kind of need to like not be weird. Okay, we need to tell people who this guy is. Can you imagine if Cillian Murphy as Oppenheimer was just like telling fart jokes and just like breaking character because it was funny in the moment? Chris Nolan would have shut that down in a heartbeat, So, and that's the thing where I just keep going back to Ridley Scott dedicating this to his dog. I'm sorry. So anyway, let's move on.
Oh my God.
We've talked
anyway.
about
Okay. So then finally we have Vanessa Kirby. She was also in a movie earlier. I was just going to mention, both these actors were in movies earlier this year. And there are a lot of other actors in this film. I just feel like for some reason, the cast of this movie is so, it's just the rest of the cast you just kind of like forget about, with the exception of Joaquin and Vanessa Kirby. Vanessa Kirby was earlier in this year. She was in Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning. So that's the cast.
Beautiful.
I think, and
she's absolutely
she's beautiful.
gorgeous.
I think the biggest issues with her character generally just come down to like, you don't at first you think that she's actually in love with Napoleon, but there's a part of me that wonders, okay, is she just in love with Napoleon because she doesn't have a husband now, and so this is the first man that's just like he's a French soldier or a French officer essentially, and so I think I'll be secure with this guy, and then eventually she's like sleeping around with some other guy, even though she's like there's this whole other part of it, and then you never really buy that these two love each other. Like I just never buy that there's any kind of chemistry between the two. Yeah. And that was
chemistry.
Like
that's the difference. Like, so you have you have what's going on in the narrative, but then you also have what's going on in the filmmaking, right? Where you're just like, this is not the most interesting part of this story. Why are we harping on it? And then eventually you're like, oh no, this is the story. And they don't. That's why I kept saying, well, Charlie, that's the point, that you don't know if she loves him or not. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not interested in that. That's not a good story.
It could have been. I think it could have been interesting. I just don't think any of it is interesting enough. And some of it's also, I just feel like there's no dialogue. Like I wish there was more dialogue to express those feelings. But like you said in your opening, it's like they just stare at each other for most of the time.
Yeah.
And there's not much there. And I wish there was more. But there isn't. So those are my slides for tonight. But you wanted to talk to me about initial ranking. Go ahead and add that to the stage. There we go.
I got it.
You got it. He's got it.
Okay. The text is getting very small. We are on. Cheers to that, real quick. We're at number 50, McCurdy. That's about a year's worth of episodes there.
Yep. Yes, it is. So, my initial thoughts on going into this movie after I left the theater, because I wanted it to be in the top 5. That was my hope. I was like, oh yeah, this is going to be like a top 5 movie. I don't think it's anywhere near the top 5.
No, the trailer again. Sorry. Remember the trailer itself. And again, as somebody who used to work at Scott Free and RSA, I remember a movie came out around the same time called The Gray. Do you remember The Gray?
Yeah, is that the one with Liam Neeson and the wolves, and he's on the plane crash and everything, and he's surviving?
The Gray is awesome. Joe Carnahan, who directed it, I wish he'd make more movies. The Gray is actually a really good movie. I remember being taken by surprise by it because it came out, I think, right after Taken, and the trailer was basically like, did you like that movie Taken? Liam Neeson's now an action star, and he's going to fight wolves. And then they actually, I remember, like working there. I talked to basically people close to Joe, and I was like, so that movie's really good. They said, yeah, thanks. I said, the trailer was stupid. they go, yeah, Charlie. And I was like, in the office, I was known for asking too many questions, right? Like a little kid.
That sounds about right.
And so, like, there were times where they'd be like, oh, Char, go do this with this guy. Like somebody's showing up to the office, and be like half Char. Or other times it'd be like, don't be Char at all. And what that meant was like, ask half as many questions or don't say a word, and because like huge name people were coming in every day, right? So and so it'd be like, just don't be Char at all today. And then other days it'd be like full Char, ask whatever you want. But anyway, so I was like, so the Gray, like the movie was not what the trailer was at all. And they said, yeah, it's called Asses and Seats. What's hot right now? Well, show that off, right? So it's Liam Neeson who's hot right now, and he's going to fight wolves. Well, that's not what the movie is at all, really. But and then I couldn't help but remember all of that as I'm watching I watched the trailer today, I think, for Napoleon because I was curious. And the trailer is everything you expect. It is what it's what you expect a Napoleon movie to be. I don't think Josephine's even in the trailer.
He's in the trailer, but yeah, it's not. Yeah, you're right.
Flash,
it is not,
maybe.
Right. Okay. So my initial thought originally, I was going into this before the movie. I was thinking, okay, I'm gonna guess it'll be somewhere in the top 10. After seeing the movie, I don't think it's in the top 10. Originally, I came in here thinking, okay, it's gonna be between my highest was gonna be above Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Okay.
But the more I think about it, I'm like, I don't think you would agree that it's there. That it's highest. But I think at its lowest, I don't think this is the worst movie. And I'm not gonna come in here and say, oh, it's mid-tier. I think it's like upper mid-tier, somewhere that's kind of where my thoughts are. Maybe you're completely on a different level and you think, oh no, I think it's much lower.
Well,
I think lowest. Sorry, my highest is below Guardians.
Below Guardians.
Above Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. But I'm pretty willing to go down on that one.
Wait.
My lowest.
Continue.
Just
you keep throwing out titles. You were like, here. I thought that was your range for a second. Finish.
No,
go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So above Ninja Turtles.
Okay.
Is my highest. My lowest is probably, and I didn't see this movie, so I can't tell you. But I have a feeling based off what you guys have said about the movie, I would say somewhere around maybe below or above Asteroid City. That's kind of where I
you haven't seen Asteroid City.
I didn't see Asteroid City, and I should have. It's now out, and you can watch it on streaming.
Dude.
And I should see that now.
Okay,
but that's kind of my vague idea. But I could easily see you going like, no, Ryan, it's lower than that. And I'd be like, all right, whatever. But I think here's my as much as we're going to trash a lot of this movie, the things that I think elevate it for me is when you, and it's kind of like what you were talking about. You famously do not like Dunkirk. And I will say that the thing I think
thought
that
a lot
elevates
about
this movie,
Dunkirk. I had so many Dunkirk flashbacks.
but the thing that I think elevates this movie for me is when we're not focused on Josephine, the movie's not bad. It's actually pretty damn good. And I think when you're talking about all of the battle scenes in this film, I think those scenes, it takes a director who knows what they're doing to really make those scenes work. And I think those are the times when I think this movie is great. When
You can
when
tell
we're
the guy who made
all three
Gladiator
battle
is
scenes
behind the camera.
right.
Like the battle scenes.
All three battle scenes are great. The
Yeah.
middle battle scene, I think, is the best with the ice and everything. That is so well executed, and I think it does such a great job of, even if it's not accurate, it does such a great job of displaying Napoleon as a character and saying, "Oh, this is why he was great at the battlefield." I think that's the strongest stuff in the movie. And then I also don't think this, like, overall, I'm not going to say just the cinematography, but there are general things that at least I'm kind of like I get the point of it, even if I don't understand all of the ins and outs of all the politics. There's enough there for me at certain times when there's like the coup or like the royalist insurgency that are coming and he like destroys them. Those scenes like play out enough for me to understand. Oh, I understand what's going on in the scene. I don't need that much context to kind of get what's going on. So there are moments in this movie where I think Ridley Scott does a great job, but
yeah,
there's a lot of stuff that you and I will probably go, yeah.
I want to see the 4-hour cut.
Yes.
That's all I can think
I do
of.
too. I want to see the 4-hour
cut
version of this because
has
I
everything
felt like
Dr.
that was.
Dave talked about. You know, hey,
I
this guy
want to
was
see a longer
inspiring to his
version of
troops.
this movie.
This guy
Right.
was.
I want to see a longer version of this movie.
I'm sitting there before Dr. Dave even laid out that there would be, you know, like that was what made him a great leader, was him being amongst his men. I was sitting there going, I want to be in that camp. Like when they were in Cairo, what happens in Cairo? Well, they shoot the cannons at the pyramids and the Cairosians immediately surrender. And then suddenly an officer comes into his tent and is like, "Hey, Josephine's banging some guy." And then he's like, "Well, I need to leave," you know, and I'm like,
right.
You know, versus, and
Right.
maybe it's because I just watched, I'm not kidding, I just watched Band of Brothers for the third time this month, this month. And but that's the importance of if you're going to have a military movie, it's important to be amongst the military. And so to just suddenly jump to a scene, it's like, yeah, how exciting, and explosions and all that usual crap, but I don't care. Yeah, great visuals and all that, but when you're lacking the other half of that coin, I don't care as much. So my spread is pretty close. I'm at, oh, here's my pointer, actually. There you go.
Oh, okay.
I'm at, my range would be above Tetris, below John Wick.
Okay.
And then right with you, below Asteroid City. Because Asteroid City at least has that creative edge to it. And that's it's kind of funny that we're pointing at a movie that the only movie on this list you haven't seen.
It felt like a Wes Anderson movie at times. And I think it's just because
I had Wes Anderson moments where I was like, what if Wes Anderson directed this?
Yeah, Wes Anderson has this quirk with a lot of his movies where he can take scenarios that are supposed to be meant to be serious, and he can flip them on his head with just a line of just get the fuck out. You know, when you're in a moment where you're like, it's supposed to be super serious and everyone's kind of on board with what you're saying and everyone's being very polite. And then that one character jumps in and is completely crass and says what everyone else is thinking in the scene. And that's what happens in this movie at times. And it's a little jarring because you're expecting, and I think you and I talked about it a little bit before the show, you're expecting Wes Anderson to have directed this movie, but you don't. But because, and I talked about this when we talked about A View to a Kill, which we, at bon nauseum, as we like to say, we went on and on about the tone of that movie just feels just polar opposites at time. And I felt like that was true for this movie. You have scenes where there's blood and guts and gore, and it's taken with gravitas and seriousness. But then you get these silly scenes where there's dialogue that just seems out of place and very, like, it feels very Wes Anderson and very kind of silly.
Even
so when you have those two things,
like, whose idea
he's
was
like
it?
Railing her from behind, and then he's like, "Oh, I think that'll make us the sun." And you're like,
Yeah, like what was the thought process that like does he have a tiny dick? Because he is like a dog. He is just going after Josephine from behind, and Josephine ain't having it. She's used to men from Cairo, I guess, being all up in that, because it's like she ain't having it. And he's just there's no
romance.
There's no love making. There's no romance. There's no
it's
foreplay.
Literally,
it's
very
just
utilitarian. Like, hey, I gotta go put a sun in you. That's it.
And that's the thing, is the idea that, well, he's a military tactician and you just attack. No foreplay, just attack. And so he just, but it's embarrassing. And for the millionth time, somebody might be sitting here being like, yeah, that's the point. And I'm like, yeah, but is that interesting? It doesn't make it interesting. It makes it funny. It makes it, that's why we had the same thought where it's like, did Wes Anderson direct this movie?
Yeah.
Because it's, like I said in the opener, it's funny when it should be serious, and it's stale when it should be romantic. And so it doesn't fit that tone of a typical historical drama. We expect a certain level of respectful gravitas to a historical biopic, especially. And the postmodernists might be like, well, yeah, that's boring. Let's put a twist on it. And I say, why? I'd rather that perfect biopic versus who brought up Mozart or Amadeus. Amadeus.
It also reminded me of Amadeus.
But Amadeus,
movie that it reminded me of.
Amadeus told I honestly have no idea how historically accurate it is, but to again play that whole Victorian era idea and then have the sex involved there, it's like, okay, Amadeus was a player, but with here it's just Napoleon just. Like the sex scenes were this.
Charlie,
was it supposed to be shocking? Was it supposed to be funny? I don't know.
So this is where I go in and say, this is where the person leans in and says, I think that's the point. But my caveat, my like I'll say it like I'm gonna.
But
say
is it interesting?
I'm gonna say, hold on. I'm gonna say, I think that's the point he's trying to make. But where I agree with you, and I'm like, I think he's trying to make a point about Napoleon overall, that it makes him seem like low energy, all this other stuff about pathetic kind of guy that like was great at this one thing, but he was pathetic and like his personal life wasn't all that great. But the movie tries to make this weird roundabout point about like, and it's just the oddest part of the movie. It's the end of the movie. You see all of these battles that was fought with Napoleon, all the lives lost. And they're kind of making a point where saying like, because of Napoleon's narcissism and his ego, that all these people died in France. Like that to me seems like the point the movie tries to drive home. However, it just feels like it doesn't work because you have these epic battle scenes that are not shown in a way that shows the horrors of war. They kind of show him in a great light. Like if you're going to do that, show the horrificness, show the how awful things are for all these, and make us feel that. But instead, this movie is more triumphant in its battle scenes, and you see how he wins these wars and how the French conquer. And even when they lose, there's a little bit of a heroicism to those scenes. So then when you juxtaposition those scenes with him being like this little cuck, essentially, and and I'm not saying that like that's literally what he's being.
That's what is.
And you
happening.
See those scenes, and the silly sex scenes and him whining for sex and all this stuff. And you're trying to make that point.
And she's like, okay.
You know what other movie I thought about?
You
know what other movie I thought about when he was doing those scenes was Blue Velvet, where he's like, "Daddy wants to fuck."
Yeah, it's been a while.
Like that's what I was thinking of when I saw those scenes. But like when you put those together, all those scenes, I'm like, this just doesn't read like a well thought out, like you said earlier. Like it's not cohesive. It's very like feels like two movies in one movie, that they're two different ideas.
Versus, again, to go back to Oppenheimer, famously, it was Chris Nolan's first sex scene, and it seemed to be for a purpose, not just showing that he's a bit of a playa. Like apparently Oppenheimer is better in the sack than Napoleon, but also that was, those were the moments where they not only introduced, this woman that would have a profound effect on his life, but also that was where they first introduced that he, knew Sanskrit. And that was why it was like, he's well-versed with everything. Like the guy you could talk, he's good at parties because he could talk about anything. And he had a broad knowledge of everything, but like, I couldn't help but think though, like that moment where, so Josephine, they divorce because Josephine is barren, basically.
Right.
And he remarries a 15-year-old, which I meant to ask Dr. Dave that. Be like, would anybody actually care that she was... He dropped the bomb and Napoleon fell short. Well put, Mr. Sigma. What was I saying? Yeah, would anybody care that, back in the 1800s, would anybody care that a girl was 15 years old? I don't think so.
Know.
But they made a big deal of it. Like the Russian guy is like, that's my cousin or whatever, and my sister, and she's 15. And Napoleon's like, who cares? I don't think anybody would care back then. So that popped out.
I think there needs to be some context, that like historical clearing up of context as far as that, but then again, it's like when you kind of what you're talking about is like, if you need to make a movie like this, you kind of have to set up the framework of modern era. But at the same time, it's like now you have competing ideas of like, what is this movie trying to say? And I feel like it's very just messy. It's just overall a very messy movie. And I feel like watching it, I feel like Ridley Scott was trying to do some kind of romantic story of sorts, mixed with this more epic, heroic story.
If there's a 4-hour cut, I
want to see it. I want to see.
I worry somebody already commented this. It's probably just more Josephine, because why wouldn't it be? If they had more action stuff, that's probably what they would have done to match the trailer to get people out to theaters to watch it on a big screen. And then they would save the people talking in rooms for the 4-hour cut that you can watch at home, so you can pause it, so you can go pee.
But I kind of also wanted more context for a lot of scenes. So even if it is more talking in rooms at times, I kind of want to see what that is, because sometimes that can clarify certain scenes. You're like, oh, okay, I see what they're going for here. Another point I was going to make to you, though, we were talking about the sex scenes and everything else. It's interesting because I know the Stanley Kubrick, I was watching this other guy's channel, and he was talking about the Kubrick Napoleon that never happened. And one of the things he talks about is he mentions, because we were talking about the special NASA lenses that he was going to use for the movie and how he was going to have these sex scenes that were going to be lit by candlelight. But that particular scene that they talk about is these romantic sex scenes between Napoleon and Josephine. And to me, that only reads as, I feel like they were going to be more intimate, more lovemaking, not just this utilitarian make me a son kind
not
of
pathetic.
Like, I mean, they're not
pathetic.
these goofy weird sex scenes where you're just like, okay, like,
yeah,
all right,
yeah.
Versus something a little more romantic and a little more I don't know, they're just being something with a little more gravitas, I guess.
And
even
again,
if it's just lovemaking,
that's why I was having flashbacks of Dunkirk, because I've said a million times why I don't like Dunkirk, but in this instance specifically, it's because all of a sudden we're emphasizing. There's a lot of reasons why I don't like Dunkirk, but one of them is that the central theme seemed to be, how can we be honorable if we're in retreat, and are we cowards, and blah blah blah, and so. But what that lends to what I've been saying all night, which is stories are about what you emphasize, and more importantly, what you don't emphasize. And with Dunkirk, the emphasis was on coward. Like, are we cowards because we're retreating? And I go, that's not very interesting, especially the way they did it. Somebody would lean over and be like, "That's the point. Actually, that's the point of the movie." And I'm like, "Yeah, that's not a good story." Like. You can tell me that's the point all day, but that's not interesting. And so it's like, wait, is this whole movie about how Napoleon was a cuck? Well, actually, that's the point of the story. Yeah, that's not a very interesting story unless you're going to use that as a motivating force for why he decided to take over the world. But as I said in my opener, that wasn't properly laid out to where it just ended up being bloated and uninteresting. And it's, if the point was to make him a pathetic cuck, then maybe that's what the entire movie should have been, as opposed to pathetic cuck and then all of a sudden incredible action scene. So
yeah.
So
it just feels, it's just disjointed. Yeah. And we could go on and on, but looking at the list, what is your, where do you, because I'm kind of just in the midst of that kind of ranking. I think your initial spread is pretty, it's pretty much what I said. I've added a couple of movies up top, but I'm easily persuaded to be like, yeah, I think below John Wick makes sense. But here's the thing, looking at these movies as they go down, I think Tetris and Gran Turismo are better movies. I think the stories are better. I think they're more solid all around. Air is a movie, it's people just talking in rooms, but I still think it's so well acted and so well delivered that I think
this is a movie of people talking in rooms.
But
I can see but the talking in rooms doesn't pay off. At least with Air, it pays off. Even if I think it's very matter of fact. Again, I think the emphasis of this story is what is off, and so the emphasis on
now
Air,
we get to Creed.
It's subtler. It's not as big, but I think it's better.
Right. You get to Creed 3, and you have a really good. I think you have one of the better roles I've seen in a movie as far as villains go this year. And I think it's a pretty decent story. It's, again, it has its faults. It's not one of my favorites overall as far as these movies, but it is still pretty good. Sound of Freedom does get you very emotionally, but I do think that it is kind of clunky in its storytelling at times. Haunting in Venice, still one of my favorites. I liked, but I think we said it just kind of feels played out a little bit. Somewhere in The Creator maybe is where I'm starting to feel closer with this movie, because it is Creator is very stylized movie. But again, some of the elements just don't quite make sense, and they don't quite connect as well as I think they should. So maybe that's where I'm at, is near The Creator.
The first thought I had, like when I first sat down and looked at the list, that was my thought process through and through. I landed on, well, The Creator has that third act problem, right? Where by not sticking the landing, it's, it would have been a lot higher had it stuck the landing. But then I start looking further down, and then that's when Asteroid City catches my eye, and I just go, Asteroid City is at least has this level of Wes Anderson creativity to it, where we kind of decided that it was it's also a bit of a mess, and that's where I think Napoleon is a mess. It belongs with the messier movies. Now, The Creator, it is in that, like, that sector is mostly like third act failures. The Flash is a mess, but not a third act failure, right? Fast X and The Flash are together because they're just kind of like, more or less shameless action movies with some good emotional moments, especially The Flash. Like everything with his mom, as we talked about, is like the Flash actually makes you cry, shockingly enough.
And the worst parts about The Flash are like the CGI is probably some of the worst CGI, and it does get really confusing and messy at times. Yeah. But and that's the thing. It's like thinking about this movie, thinking about the emotionality. I never felt emotionally compromised with this movie. I was just kind of like, okay, that's how it happened. All right.
Especially between Josephine and Napoleon.
And you feel like you need that. So, and I didn't see, and Fast X, here's the thing. Fast X is a kind of a dumb movie. And we put it kind of where we did because that's what all the Fast and Furious movies have been. Yeah. And there's some really dumb meta things in Fast X.
Fast X movies are Bollywood
kind of glossed over that. But yeah, awesome. They are very...
They're awesome so far as they're just like Bollywood, where they don't care about physics. They don't care about reality. They're just family, and they just like nail that. And all the jokes come from that, and they're fun.
Fast X at least try to pull one on the audience where they were like, we're not going to make the villain one of the good guys at the end of this movie, because that was not what happens. So you really are kind of the movie does leave you question like, what's going to happen next? So yeah, I can see it. I didn't see Asteroid City, so I can't tell you, but I probably put it next to Asteroid City. Like I would have to concede to be like somewhere near there. And I think I thought that after I was looking at, and the things that raise it to the level that it's at for me really is just Ridley Scott's general direction. Now I know when people think about direction, sometimes it's just talking to actors, but when you're making a lot of choices as to what you're looking at and what you're seeing, and if you can watch the movie without the sound on, I think Ridley Scott's still a really great director. I even if this movie is not that great, I think his direction definitely elevates the movie to that Asteroid City level.
I think the edit is what killed this movie. What the editing process emphasized. Because what if this movie was only 2 hours long, and then you just touched on the Josephine stuff? Then maybe we'd be like, that was actually pretty good. Take a little Josephine stuff out and add in some Napoleon being with his troops, and you got some good stuff there. But
I think part of the problem is
you nailed it with like this movie's on fast forward. This movie is does feel like it's on fast forward.
It just feels like it's skipping over events. I think another crucial problem is I think what Ridley Scott, the filmmaker, is trying to say about Napoleon, I think doesn't land well, because I think he doesn't make a great argument for his what he's trying to say. At least that was my impression, because when you add at the end of the movie all these deaths, and you're trying to frame this story where this is the point where I go, that's the point of the movie, Charlie. It just doesn't feel like he made a good enough argument to make that last little bit work. Where I think another movie would have just gotten rid of that, because it felt like he was trying to make, it's like, I need to make a point with this movie, right? Like you need to have something at the end of the movie to make a point. And this point is people with all these narcissistic big wigs, they make all these crazy, lots of people die, like Hitler. And like that was another thing I didn't really mention, but apparently he had made mention of Hitler and Napoleon, but he had also went on to say, it's like, I wasn't talking specifically about him and Hitler. I was talking about Hitler and Charlemagne and all these other greats, and how there's all these
great men have big ass body counts, body counts.
So he's making this point, but it's like,
but hang on, back up. What you're talking about is at the very end of the movie, it lays out his biggest campaigns and all the body counts from it, and then it basically totals it up. It's like 3 million people dead because Napoleon did his thing, right? He's responsible for 3 million deaths. Now, to back up to the very beginning of the movie, where it's, again, the first lines are like, because the people were miserable, they chose tyranny, and it led them back to misery. That's the bookend. That's what this movie should have been. He came from nothing and conquered everything.
But that's where this movie just kind of goes in a different direction.
The people chose to do this thing where, like, for Viva la France, we're going to take over the continent. And then at the end, it's like, well, here's what happened because of that. Because they opened the door to that, because we didn't even talk about what's her name, who at the beginning of the movie, they guillotine her head,
Marie Antoinette.
Marie Antoinette, when they're killing off the royals. That's like, and that was all good. That painted the picture of where we were. So you have the beginning being like the people chose tyranny, right? And because that's the nature of a power vacuum, right? You have a power vacuum, somebody's going to fill it. I recently, Tim Pool, I watched a Tim Pool video on this where he was talking about how these revolutionaries, they want to take the hierarchical pyramid, right, which is reflected by the royals, and they want to flip it upside down. And he points out, he goes, well, if you flip a pyramid upside down, it's not just an inverted pyramid. Gravity is going to make it collapse into a new pyramid, but you suddenly have some of the people on top, or some people who were on the bottom are now on top. It's like, well, yeah, that's the point. That's what the revolutionaries want. They want to trick the dumb masses into putting them in power. And that's kind of what Dr. Dave was talking about, is that, You have this young idealistic Napoleon who's like, I'm gonna take over, but when I take over, everything's gonna be great. But then he just ends up being like every other tyrant, right? That's a story. That's a tale as old as time. My point, to get back to what you were saying, McCurdy, is that the movie starts out with that's the theme, and then the movie ends with this long list of deaths. But then it also emphasizes the Josephine thing, and that's where it's not succinct. That's where it's not specific. That's why it's a mess.
For me, it's like, is he making like this is where I get confused.
Ridley, what are you trying to say with this?
What?
Well, I don't know. My dog's dead. My dog.
My dog's dead. What?
Lulu.
Every interview you watch with Ridley Scott, his go-to thing is he'll say right, like he'll say right at the end of every sentence, so that he's like confirming what he's saying is correct. So he'll be like, he'll just say, yeah, like, Man with the Golden Gun is just a terrible movie, right? So I made a better movie called On Her Majesty's Secret Napoleon, and it's a better movie, right? So anyway, that's a joke. But my point, I think I'm trying to say, is I felt like he's emphasizing the Josephine part just to say that, like, he's doing all these horrific deaths, but he's so like he's so inept,
his wife
and he just wants to prove something. Yeah, he just wants to prove something to his wife, and therefore. But then again, like, the love story with his wife just feels so lost, because you get this scene where, like, you find out she's sleeping with another guy. And then in the same breath, she's like, "You were sleeping with other people too, weren't you, dude?" And he's like, "Yeah, but that's not the point. The point is you slept with somebody else." And I'm a military leader.
And he's screaming at her. He's like,
"I'm a big man.
I'm the most important thing in your life." And then the next scene, she turns it on him. But then by the end of the
movie, but I feel like in a better movie, they would have had enough scenes where there was some sort of culmination with the relationship, where you really did feel like they loved each other. But I just never bought the relationship, and I never bought like his love for her. I never understood it. I never was like, oh, yeah, this makes sense. I get why he was fascinated with Josephine. Like, I get why he was in love with her. And
again, and beyond anybody saying that's the point, it's like not from a narrative perspective, but from a filmmaking perspective. Like, I get that they maybe wanted us to really think like, oh, it's complicated and like their relationship isn't perfect. I get that. That's not what we're saying. We're saying that I'm sitting in my seat going, I don't care. Make me care. Even if it's like I said in the opener, it's hard to care about two people who stare blankly at each other and then go cheat on each other. Well, Charlie, that's the point. They were cheating on each other. Yeah, well, make me care somehow, please. That's what you're supposed to do, is make me care, regardless of the circumstances. And you just don't. That's why the movie's underwhelming. So there's like I said, they got divorced, and then he had a kid with someone else. And then I feel almost like that was never solidified, like, what happened.
There was a part, because I felt like that stuff got rushed, because there's this aspect of the movie where they're like, he has to have an heir, and I understood that. Like, that was something I was like, understand.
Gotta have an heir. You're the emperor.
You gotta have an heir because you're the emperor, and it can't be a woman. It has to be a man, because that's just the times, right? And so I understood that aspect of it, but then it was like there was a part where it was like I don't know if his mom or some woman, I don't know if that was his mom or not, but she's like, hey, this like girl, she's 18. Coach. She's like, listen, we're going to figure this whole thing out with your
Let's
wife.
Run a test. How about you bang an 18-year-old and see if you knock her up? And he's like, he's like not wanting to do it. He's like, okay. I'm so nervous.
All right,
about
this,
I guess. Yeah. And that's where it's like, maybe he was lying about affairs, because it's like he's oddly not that great at sex.
But at the same time, to his thought process, Ridley Scott decides not to show that sex scene.
Yeah.
Instead, just turns off the dark. So I'm like, okay, if that's like the little indication we get that he's still in love with Josephine, even though he has to sleep with this other girl to get her pregnant, I'm like, okay, whatever. But then he gets married to the Austrian Duke or whatever, the Austrian king's sister, to solidify this relationship. So I'm like, I'm on board with this. I understand.
I think it was the Russians
then later,
at that point, but yeah.
No. It was Australia, because the Russians were like, no, sorry, my one sister's accounted for, my other sister's too young. So then he ends up going to the Austrians, And
What?
that's
No,
where
he said my sister's 15, and then he was like, I don't care if she's 15.
Yeah,
and then
no,
they,
and then
they
that's
drifted
the
to it.
sister he ended. Yeah, that's the
That was
sister
the
he ended
Russian
up with.
sister, and then
The
right after that,
not
he
the
invaded
Austrian sister.
Russia. And
Yeah,
even though
because he was
had
with
just
the
married
Austrians at that point. Yeah, that was the whole thing. It's like he was friends, like him and the Russians were friends with Austria, and then a friend Austria and Russia decided to turn on to him, and then finally he's like talking to the Austrians because he like first he talks to the Russians like we should solidify this relationship. It's like, oh, is your sister accounted for? He's like, yeah, sorry, dude, can't be with my sister. What about your other sister? Yeah, no, she's too young. But then he's like, goes to Austria, and then he's like, wait a minute, you've got a sister, and he's like, yeah, I do got a sister.
Wait, that happened? No, I thought I thought the 15-year-old sister of the Russian.
If I'm wrong, I'm wrong.
I think I'm
if
right.
I'm wrong, I'm wrong. We go to jail.
I think I'm right. I think you're wrong, but let's agree that
right.
who cares? Because again, the movie's not
a little
about
confusing.
That.
But then we jump forward farther in time and we find out, okay, his son's born, but then they never clarify if it's his bastard son or the son of his. So that's another question I'd have for Dr. Dave. It's like, wait, did he have a son? And is his son this? Like, who was? Yeah, so that was confusing.
And then
for me. I was
he
like,
asked if they could lie about the son's birth so he could keep his wife, and then they said
and
no.
Because
so
I watched literally because I watched Game of Thrones, the only reason, like, that was the one time where I was like, oh, Game of Thrones knowledge has crept back into my mind and understanding the ideas of bastardry in the medieval to the royal times, where it's like, oh yeah, well, if I legitimize my bastards, then therefore they can whatever.
Yeah,
that was a whole thing.
Yeah,
but they never clear on that. That whole aspect is kind of just like, all right, and we're moving on back to Waterloo, and like the movie just kind of fast forward.
Like at some point, he takes the bastard kid and brings it to Josephine, and Josephine's holding it and says, someday you'll understand the sacrifice. Well, yeah, I was like, don't give her the kid. Yeah, but
throw him in the water.
He says something along the lines of, someday you'll understand the sacrifice I made for you. And all I could think is that was Ridley Scott saying that to Josephine. Like he sacrificed this whole movie for the sake of her. The last word of the movie is Josephine. And that's where I'm just like, ugh, big old ugh.
Yeah, I don't get it. I don't get
last
it.
Thing there, though, McCurdy, what last question I have for you is, what'd you think of his death? I wish I would have asked Dr. Dave on that. Like, because they did did you ever see Godfather 3, where it's kind of the same thing? Where
I
it's
never
just
saw the third one.
Godfather's just, Al Pacino's just sitting there and he's old as hell, and he just falls.
That's kind of how he dies in the second. That's how the Godfather dies. Marlon Brando dies in the first one.
Roughly, he's running around.
He's running around and playing tag, and then he falls.
It's kind of meant to reflect that, but he's literally sitting in a chair and he just kind of heaves over. But it's kind of like played out to where you're expecting it. Whereas with this, he's like, from what I recall, he's talking to some girls. I can't remember who they are, but he's just like, he's banished.
That was another thing.
And he's talking to them, and then he just dies. And it's like, like you said, the movie's on fast forward. I'm like, oh, it's
on
now?
Fast forward, but it also feels like part of me also says this movie feels like you need to have a history degree to understand who some of these characters are and the relevance in the story, because you're not prompted as an audience member. You're just kind of expected to know who all these people are. So it's like the feeling for somebody who goes into a Marvel movie and hasn't seen all the other Marvel films, and you're like, wait, how is this? Who's this person? And that happens a lot in this movie, where you're like, wait, who's this fat guy all of a sudden who's asking about a succulent breakfast, and why am I supposed to care about this guy? And it just gets weird from there. But there's another part of this movie that
I'm having a succulent
breakfast. I'm going to quote this movie. Like, there's at least 3 lines in this movie that are quotable. I'll give it that.
But not in a classy way. In like a postmodern,
no, more of like
making a joke
like
of history.
This is funny.
Like Mel Brooks directed.
You just think you're great because you got boats.
Because you have boats.
Because you have boats.
Yeah.
And then I enjoy the scene where he's like, I enjoy my meals. I do. Destiny has brought me this lamb chop.
This lamb chop. Yeah.
Yeah,
like,
that scene at least, like, it's, anyway, where was I? Yeah, anyway. Oh, another point of the movie that I just wanted to bring up that I felt was kind of odd. The movie skips Josephine's daughter, like, because they establish early in the movie that Josephine had kids with her late husband.
Yeah, where did they go?
And then they disappear for like a good runtime of the movie, and then all of a sudden, at the very end of the movie, he's talking to Josephine's daughter,
Yeah.
and you're like, what? And it's kind of, again, because time passes so quickly and you're not really feeling it. Like a better movie, Barry Lyndon, does a great
Better
job of
movie.
you feeling the passage of time.
Yeah.
As far, even though the actors, Ryan O'Neal plays the same character throughout the whole movie from teenage years to his adult life, at least you do get this feeling of passage of time with other characters, and like and you feel it. So by the end of the movie, when his nephew or niece, or I think it's his nephew, whatever, whoever it is that he ends up, if you haven't seen the movie, sorry, you need to see it. He ends up killing, like, you feel the age difference. Like they remind you, like, oh yeah, he's at this age at this point. And then by the end of the movie, he's like, oh, he's more of close to an adult. Like, you feel that. This movie, it's just like, she's a kid. End of the movie, she's adult. You're like, wait, where were you the rest of this movie? There was a lot of stuff going on. I don't, like, there's just a little bit of that. So
as we
anyway,
keep saying, I look forward to the 4-hour version, but
I
that
want to see
doesn't
a longer
change the
version of
fact
this.
that this is the theatrical, and it didn't make good decisions, unfortunately. So I went ahead and I done did it, McCurdy. I put it below Asteroid City. I think it just has.
And I need to see Asteroid City, but I would probably generally agree with you. I think at the end of the day, I think Ridley Scott's directing does elevate this movie to make it watchable, and you're still engaged throughout the whole thing, even if it's just really misses on certain things. But overall, I'm comparing to other movies this year. I really went into, I put up this on our schedule thinking, oh, this will be maybe a top 10 contender, and I was
for sure.
I was very much
Let down.
underwhelmed and kind of let down. Yeah.
All the movies above it, you won't necessarily leave disappointed, other than stuff like The Creator, which for its own reasons, like because The Creator is so damn creative, it has some, elements that would put it above this. But even looking just below it, take like Spider-Man. Like, in my opinion, Spider-Man is just as messy, but has the beautiful cinematography and great action scenes and the fun stuff, but is a mess all the same. I mean, the first half of the movie is just like, how's Spider-Man gonna juggle being a normal kid? And, Spider-Man 2 elements where it's like, why are we doing any of this? Why aren't we this is the sequel to the Spider-Verse. Let's get right into the Across the Spider-Verse stuff. But so that's where it feels like it's a lot of filler. And then this movie also feels like a lot of filler. So then take Asteroid City, that we took the new Wes Anderson movie that probably should be in the top 10 at least, but was its own level of mess, where it was bogged down by its own mistakes of emphasizing the wrong things, right? But I think once you watch it, you'll see that,
because
like,
I think
it
the
has a
point that
level
you
of
guys
creativity to it that is
Right.
admirable. But there is a lot to, like, did you watch the
the
episode?
point, I didn't watch it. I just remember you guys harping about the point with, and I think you had told me this after the fact. Even one of our other friends had said something about how his whole point with, like, it kind of almost being retrospective of the artist itself, of Wes Anderson himself, and making those kind of weird meta commentary things just doesn't work for this particular movie.
Yeah.
And it felt, and in the same regards, I could see it with this movie, where I feel like Ridley Scott was trying to make a point, and it's just not very clear, because he kind of does it, like, he kind of does one thing that also kind of negates the other things that he's trying to say. So it really kind of feels a little lackluster, and you're a little confused. And it's messy.
Asteroid City is messy. So is Spider-Man. So is Napoleon. So is Fast X and The Flash. I'd say The Flash is probably more messy than Fast X, but I think
Flash has at
all
least
those
a
movies
line story that you can follow. This is just like event after event after event, not so much a solid narrative, I guess. So.
Yeah, I think the best comment you made tonight is it's a movie on fast forward, and then slows down for the boring. I as usual, I hesitate to say boring. I hesitate to say boring because it makes me sound stupid.
Just weird.
But they're
silly.
They're drawn out.
They're played,
and drawing
silly.
them out without a purpose is boring. So, and then it's like, oh, look, a big exciting scene, and I'm supposed to be happy about that. I'm like, no, I don't care about the big exciting scene, because you didn't take us through the troops and talk with them and inspire them, and then therefore inspire us, blah blah blah. Anyway, we've gone on for 2 hours. This movie belongs at 20 1 out of 50. Cheers to 50. We're coming on 2 hours, McCurdy, so I'm going to call it just before we let's toast in the next 30 seconds.
Toast. Hold on.
Who are we toasting to?
We're toasting to your mom.
Okay.
No, we're toasting.
To
I found
Napoleon
the worst
himself.
the worst painted portrait of him, and I was like, yeah, that's how we would feel after watching this movie. Like,
Perfect.
it's
All right,
not
to Napoleon.
not who I was.
To Napoleon,
To
who's
Napoleon.
better than this movie, and he's rolling in his grave. Okay, good night.